Hikmah History presents the Battle of Ankara in 1402. One of the most epic battles ever. I mean, how often do you get two sides at their competitive best going up against one another? It doesn't happen that often. But when the Timurids and the Ottomans met on the battlefields of Ankara, they were both enjoying a wave of momentum which had seen them become major powers in their regions. And the aftermath of the battle sheds light onto one of the more stranger lessons we can learn from history, which is that the winner of the battle is not always the victor of the war. So let's get into it. On the one hand side you had the Timurids, who were led by Timur, known in the West as Timur Lane or Timur the Lame. You can find out more about why Timur was called the Lame and more about his general life in the video that we did on him. But for the purpose of this video, and to cut a long story short, despite being one of the baddest men on the planet, Timur was actually a cripple, hence the name the Lame, meaning that he had a lame leg that he had to drag around everywhere. Now, Timur claimed descendants from Genghis Khan, the great Mongol leader, and Timur worked very hard at trying to replicate the legacy of his famous ancestor. City after city succumbed to Timur's forces throughout Central Asia, Persia, the Indian subcontinent, and the Middle East. He conquered and destroyed great cities such as Damascus and Delhi, and in the process defeated major powers of the time, such as the Mamluks of Syria and Egypt and the Delhi Sultanate of India. Needless to say, his achievements would have made his ancestor Genghis proud. But he was coming up against an opponent that was more formidable than any he had faced in more than 30 years of conquest. Standing across the battlefield would be Sultan Bayezid of the Ottoman Empire, who in a little more than 10 years had expanded the Ottoman outreach into Europe, capturing much of the Balkans. He had already defeated a crusade at Nicopolis, for which he earned the nickname Yildirim, or Thunderbolt. On the eve of the Battle of Ankara, Bayezid was preparing to lay siege to the city of Constantinople, which he had been blockading for 12 years already. Now the immediate catalyst for the battle was Bayezid attacking a Turkmen beylik. Beylik meaning a small state. Timur took offense to this because he claimed sovereignty over Turkmen rulers in Anatolia. But in many ways this was an excuse for a confrontation that was inevitable somewhere down the line. Timur and Bayezid had been exchanging insulting letters for years before the battle. In one such letter, Bayezid stated, "If I fly from your arms, may my wives be divorced from my bed 3 times. But if you have no courage to meet me in the field, may you receive your wives after they have 3 times endured the embraces of a stranger." But it's important not to over-romanticize the role of these insulting letters, because you could argue that two super powerful states living side by side would always come to a clash inevitably in order to determine who was the alpha male. So when Bayezid heard that Timur was moving in his direction, he decided to abandon the siege of Constantinople and look to confront his fellow Turkic rival. It is surprising to learn that a man as accomplished as Timur could still be underestimated, considering everything he had achieved. But this is exactly what Bayezid did, because as he was marching towards his foe, Bayezid rejected the advice of his generals to wait for Timur at Ankara in central Anatolia, which could have actually been advantageous to them because of their familiarity with the terrain. Instead, Bayezid decided to march further east and meet Timur there. But the wily old Turkic general maneuvered his forces so that they moved around the Ottomans and ended up behind them, even going as far to making use of Bayezid's camp at Ankara. When Bayezid had heard this, he forced his troops to march back in the direction they came from in order to relieve Timur's siege of the city of Ankara. Now you have to bear in mind that all of this marching took place under the scorching heat of the midsummer sun, meaning that the Ottoman forces would have been exhausted by the time they arrived at the battle site. What's more, the Ottomans had discovered that Timur had diverted the main water supply available to them. All of these factors meant that Timur had marched into enemy territory and put himself in a position where he held all of the strategic advantages. Undoubtedly a mark of genius. Considering the epicness of this battle, the number of troops involved in it have traditionally been exaggerated in historical accounts, with some numbers suggesting as high as 1.5 million soldiers on each side. But if we take into account the swiftness of their movement, each side probably had around 20,000 soldiers. Despite being thirsty and tired, the Ottomans fought quite well. This was especially true of the Serbian contingent under the control of Bayezid's brother-in-law, Stefan Lazarevic. But the key moment in the battle came when the Tatars on Bayezid's side switched sides and began attacking the Ottomans. Their allegiance had been bought by Timur prior to the battle. In the midst of the confusion, Bayezid's troops broke rank and were decisively defeated. Bayezid himself narrowly escaped into the mountains, but Timur had the area surrounded and soon captured his foe. The defeated Bayezid was placed in a golden cage and died in captivity soon after, a humiliating end to a man who had enjoyed such heights of power and prestige. His empire now lay in ruins as his sons began to fight amongst themselves, a period known as the Ottoman Interregnum, lasting for more than a decade after the Battle of Ankara. In a remarkable comeback story though, the Ottomans would bounce back to achieve far more glory than they had ever experienced before the Battle of Ankara. Timur's invasion of Anatolia gifted Constantinople an extra 50 years as the seat of the Byzantine Empire, before the young Ottoman Sultan Mehmet was able to overcome its impressive fortifications in 1453. As for the Timurids, Timur ravaged Anatolia before casting his sights eastward. But the decades of being in the saddle had caught up with him, and at the age of 70, on his way to attacking China and fulfilling the legacy of his Mongolian forefathers, Timur died in 1405. Politically, his empire crumbled under the pressure of all of the divisions within his family. But in the process, it created a cultural renaissance in places like Samarkand in modern-day Uzbekistan and Herat in Afghanistan. I want to thank you all for watching and listening. Special thanks goes to all of our Patreons for continuing to support Hikmah History. If you'd like to contribute, follow the link in the bio. Until next time, I'll see you guys soon. Peace.